citizen, same vision is for equal rights and justice for the people them. What's happening to this beautiful world that we're living in? World citizen, lift up your voices.
Welcome everyone. We are so glad to have you join us in the People Powered Planet podcast. Every week at Wednesday, 1700 Greenwich Mean Time, 10 a.m. Pacific Time, we have extraordinary guests talking about the key questions of how do we actually solve the problems that are facing our planet, that threaten our very extinction. The key to our program is that we're looking for solution areas. Now, toward the end, we'll get everybody to be able to join, but for now, we're going to be focusing just on Ira and I as we do our chat, and then turn it over to everyone else. Now, I want to introduce an extraordinary guest. Ira Helfand is the co-founder of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. I got to know them way back when they helped on a film that I produced called The World Is My Country, called War Without Winners. The later film was The World Is My Country. That's the one we have now. But when I produced War Without Winners with Paul Newman, International Physicians were a part of that. And Ira he also helped get started an incredible organization, ICAN, and it stands for the, well, I should have this right here, it's the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Now, they were given the Nobel Peace Prize because they initiated a treaty for the abolition of nuclear war. Now, a lot of people have talked about abolishing nuclear war, but this treaty actually got 122 nations, most of the world's nations voted for it, only one voted against, one abstained. It was an incredible achievement to get that started. Now, once you sign it, once you do a treaty with the UN, once you vote for a treaty, it has to get ratified. It goes back to your legislature or whatever. At this point, Ira's going to tell us how many people in the world have already ratified it and how close we are to having this treaty become official world law. Ira?
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Arthur, for having me and for featuring this particular issue, the prevention of nuclear war, which I think is really so critically important. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was signed by 83 countries so far, and it has been ratified by 44. And when 50 countries ratify the treaty, it becomes international law. It enters into force. And we expect that the 50th ratification will take place sometime in September or October. There's actually a 90-day waiting period after that ratification before it actually enters into force. So the actual entry will take place in late December or January.
That is a landmark event indeed. And so let me get clear that I understand this. So 122 voted for it, 83 signed it, and now the ratifications have to come to 50 before it becomes official international law. Now, what does that mean when it becomes official international law?
When this enters into force, it will be illegal to possess nuclear weapons, not just to use them or to threaten to use them, but simply to possess them will be defined under international law as being in violation of humanitarian law. And countries that possess these weapons, banks, financial institutions, corporations that produce these weapons or finance the production of these weapons will be in violation of this treaty. And wow. This is the first time that the world community has said that simply possessing nuclear weapons is a crime against humanity, and it's an enormously important step forward. But as you know, Arthur, one of the problems with the treaty is that it has not yet been signed by any of the nuclear armed states, the countries that actually possess the weapons. And so the real next step is going to be to get those countries to honor the provisions of this treaty and to honor the obligations which many of them already have under the old non-proliferation treaty to get rid of their weapons, to actually dismantle the remaining nuclear warheads.
Well, that's going to be a big step. Well, let's get back to that issue more later, but let's talk a little bit more before we do about how we enforce this. You gave an incredible talk. I thought it was just chilling at the Rotary International Peace Conference. I found it one of the most both fascinating but also terrorizing kind of talks. Tell me, In 1940, when the bomb was first dropped in 1945, and one bomb destroyed a city. In 1947, some of the very scientists that worked on that bomb started a clock, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists doomsday clock that said we were 7 minutes to midnight of unfathomable destruction, the end of civilization, end of life as we know it on the planet. What did that mean, 7 minutes before midnight, and what's happened with that clock since?
Well, it's sort of an arbitrary figure that they picked at that moment, but they were trying to create the understanding that nuclear war was a real threat, that there was a real danger that nuclear weapons would be used, and that if they were, the consequences would be unbelievably catastrophic. They've now advanced the clock to 100 seconds to midnight.
Wow. Now that 100 seconds, that is fundamentally frightening. Now let's go back, because I want people to understand this a little more. As I understand it, the 7 minutes meant, you know, in the clock of human history, if we look at human existence on this planet, we are at the 7 minutes to the end of that full clock of human existence. And that clock that moved from 7 minutes stepped back at several key points when we came to our senses, and now is in the most hazardous place. Let me go back to those places where we stepped back from the brink in the past. Can you tell us what were the key times where we were able to step back from being so close to the destruction of our life and our life on this earth?
Well, you know, the most important step back was the end of the Cold War. And at that point in time, 1989, 1990, 1991, as the Cold War wound down and the Soviet Union dismantled itself, there was an enormous sense of relief around the world that we had dodged the war that we all feared would take place during the confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. And there have been some other ups and downs since then. But I think the really important point about the clock is this. We have to understand that nuclear weapons are a real threat. And one of the big problems that we face today is that people don't understand that. You know, if you ask people what are the major problems in the world today, there are all kinds of pressing issues. But almost no one lists nuclear weapons, nuclear war, as one of the great threats that we face. That's very different than it was 30 or 40 years ago. In the 1980s, if you ask people, what are the major issues facing mankind? Preventing nuclear war, eliminating nuclear weapons was number one and number two on everybody's list. And we've lost that understanding. We don't appreciate how dangerous the situation is. And there's this real disconnect between the experts, people like the people at the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists are telling us that we're closer to nuclear war than we've ever been, and the public perception, which is this isn't something we need to worry about very much. And so the great service, I think, which the Bulletin has done is to try to draw attention to the very real danger we face today. And other experts, people like William Perry, are saying the same thing. William Perry, the former Secretary of Defense, has stated repeatedly that we are closer to nuclear war today than we ever were during the Cold War. And these warnings come at a time when we're also beginning to understand more fully how bad nuclear war would be. We used to think that it was just an all-out war between the United States and Soviet Union that would be a threat to the whole planet. What we now understand is that even a very limited nuclear war, as might take place between India and Pakistan, would also be a threat to the entire planet.
Now, how is that?
The most recent study that came out was released in September of last year, examined what would happen if India and Pakistan went to war, and found that locally in South Asia, the consequences are unbelievably catastrophic. In the first week, something between 75 and 125 million people die from the explosions, from the fires, from the radiation. But that's only a part of the story, because the fires started by these nuclear explosions put an enormous amount of soot into the upper atmosphere, blocks out the sun, drops temperatures across the planet, leads to a marked decrease in precipitation. And as a result of this worldwide climate disruption, food production plummets. And this localized war in South Asia triggers a famine across the entire planet that puts upwards of 2 billion people at risk of starvation. Now, this is an event which is utterly unprecedented in human history. A famine that threatened 2 billion people would not mean the extinction of our species, but it would mean the end of civilization as we know it. No civilization in history has ever withstood a shock of this magnitude. And there's no reason to believe that our current system, which is very fragile in many ways, would do any better. The economic system that we all depend on to put food on our tables and to heat our homes, to clothe ourselves, that system would collapse under this kind of strain. And the world that we know would simply disappear. This is something which the experts tell us can happen today while we're sitting here talking. India and Pakistan came close to war twice last year and stepped back from the brink at the last moment. US and Russia are engaged in a nuclear standoff that we never thought we would see again when the Cold War ended. Both countries are spending enormous sums of money, hundreds of billions of dollars, to modernize and improve their nuclear arsenals. They're both threatening the other country with nuclear warfare. They're both conducting war games, again, in which nuclear weapon use is programmed as part of the possible scenario. It is an unbelievably dangerous situation, and one of the greatest aspects of the danger is that we're not paying enough attention to it. We should all be out there, as we were in the 1980s, those of us who are of my age, as we were in the 1980s, demanding a fundamental change in nuclear policy. And the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is an important international response to that need. It is the international community coming together at the government level, the countries which don't have nuclear weapons predominantly, saying to the countries which do have nuclear weapons, this is not acceptable. You cannot continue to hold our people hostage to the whims of your leaders, many of whom do not appear to us to be particularly stable or wise. This situation has to change. You have got to stop threatening human survival.
So speaking about whether our leaders are wise, if we look back at the presidents the United States has had, we had President Kennedy came perilously close to a nuclear war with Russia when they put missiles in Cuba. And I remember growing up in high school at that time, and all around me, people were mobilizing for war. Soldiers were being called up. The teachers were telling us to hide under our desks because we were having nuclear war. I refused. I said, Washington, D.C. is going to be wiped out. There won't be. If you saw the picture of Hiroshima, there's no hiding under your desk. But there was this incredible fear, and Kennedy's response to that was to resist his hardliners who were telling him to go ahead and attack. And he also had hardliners telling him that he should go ahead and fight a nuclear war with Russia, wipe out those weapons and all that. And he pushed back to that. And then he gave an incredible speech to the United Nations where he said, every man, woman, and child lives under this nuclear sword of Damocles hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accident, by miscalculation, or by design. He said, the weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us. And so he had the brains to step back. Later, when Ronald Reagan came into office, his generals again were egging him on. They were saying, come on, we can fight a nuclear war, we can win this and all that. And then what happens, he saw a film the day after. I was part of that film. I did the nuclear war research for it. I was faxing out to the crew so they could build the sets, how much damage to have each distance from the nuclear epicenter. And boy, that caused me to have nuclear war nightmares. But Ronald Reagan says in his memoirs that when he saw that movie, he realized that his generals were lying to him, and that he had to step back, and they had to start strategic arms limitation talks with the Soviets. And he actually created some incredible treaties that moved us forward to begin to step back from that nuclear devastation. What happened now with those treaties now under the current administration?
Well, it's not just the current administration. It's basically, for most of the nuclear weapons era, the people who have been in charge of these arsenals have not understood what these weapons would do. As you pointed out, Kennedy was surrounded by people who thought it was okay to have a nuclear war. Reagan himself came to office pledging to be able to fight and win a nuclear war in Europe as though that were possible. And it was official US policy at that point that we were going to pursue the ability to fight and win a nuclear war in Europe. To this day, we encounter all the time leaders of nuclear armed states who do not begin to understand what these weapons will do. President Trump has said to his generals that he wanted to increase the size of the US nuclear arsenal tenfold. I have no idea what in the world he would be thinking would be the reason for doing that, since the arsenal that we have today is more than enough to destroy the world many, many, many times over. But there has just been a general lack of understanding about how destructive these weapons are. The current administration has done some very bad things. It is moving us away from the few remaining arms control agreements that we have with the Russians, and they may pull us out of the one remaining agreement, the New START treaty, which expires next year unless it is renewed. And then there will be no constraints at all on either the United States or Russia from expanding their nuclear arsenals. This would reverse a trend that was set in place actually even before Ronald Reagan, with the original SALT agreements back in the 70s, trying to get some grip on the arms race and keep it from racing out of control. What we need to do now is to move in the opposite direction. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, I think, sets forward the roadmap for going forward, that we need now to begin the serious work of negotiating the final elimination of these weapons, not just limiting their numbers, but getting rid of them altogether. And the task for those of us who live in the United States is to figure out how we mobilize the political will here to bring about the fundamental change in US nuclear policy that is needed to bring the US into compliance with that treaty, and to get the United States to work with the other 8 nuclear armed states to bring all of them into compliance with that treaty.
Well, very, very crucial. Now, I was also reading just recently that the nuclear arms saber rattling that the U.S. has been doing, and the breaking down of some of these, the actually violating treaties that we came to, breaking off treaties that were crucially important with preventing, Iran from getting nuclear weapons and so on, that all of these key things are also egging China on to begin perhaps a new arms race. At least some people there are saying that they need to start doing that. What do you think about that added danger?
Well, I think this, relations between the United States and Russia are the worst they've been since the end of the Cold War. Relations between the United States and China are the worst they've been since the 1980s. We are in a very difficult situation with regards to China. This is a country with whom the United States has a significant economic rivalry, and that economic rivalry is now developing into a military rivalry as well. The Chinese are concerned that the United States plans to develop new nuclear weapons are primarily aimed at them, and that's probably true. And the United States is concerned that the Chinese are acting in a somewhat aggressive manner around the perimeter of China towards their various neighbors. This is the kind of situation that we got into before with the Soviet Union. This kind of Cold War approach that says we're going to, bully the other side into acquiescing to what we want. We have to understand that given the stakes, given what's going to happen if we go to war by deliberate intent or because we stumble into it, which happens not infrequently in the world, given the stakes with our current nuclear arsenals, we've got to have a different relationship with China. And we need to sit down with the Chinese and we need to put everything on the table and say, look, we cannot afford a military conflict. We have to figure out how we resolve our differences peacefully. And it is a fundamentally different approach than the one that the current administration is pursuing with regards to China. And I'm not at all clear that any administration that's on the horizon is going to have the fundamental change in policy needed. And so that becomes a job for the citizenry. We need to create the understanding among enough people to put pressure on the government to do the right thing. And we've launched a campaign here in the United States called Back from the Brink, the call to prevent nuclear war. It's modeled much on the work that we've done in ICAN and also on the Freeze campaign here in the United States back in the 1980s. It is organized around a simple platform, a prescription of what US nuclear policy ought to be. It's a 5-plank platform, and the most important is the 5th plank, which calls on the United States to enter now into negotiations with all of the other nuclear armed states for an enforceable, verifiable, time-bound agreement to dismantle the remaining 14,000 nuclear warheads in the world. In addition, as those negotiations proceed, we ask the United States to take a number of simple steps to lessen the danger now. We should take our weapons off hair trigger alert. We should announce that we will never use nuclear weapons first. We should end the current situation whereby the President of the United States can launch nuclear war solely on his or her own authority. And we should stop the plans to spend $1.7 trillion of our national treasure enhancing, modernizing, making more deadly our nuclear arsenal.
Wow.
And if we do these things,
those kind of like crucial steps. And so what is the argument by the people who say we need to continue these nuclear weapons? What's their counter argument, and how do you counter that?
well, the proponents of nuclear weapons have always argued that they make us safe. And this is an argument that resonates strongly with people. Throughout most of human history, having bigger, stronger weapons probably did make you safe if you had enemies in the world. But as Einstein famously observed, the splitting of the atom has changed everything. And when the weapons you possess are essentially suicide bombs, when the use of your own weapons will kill you, that logic that bigger, better weapons make us safer goes away. They may make us stronger, but they don't make us safer. They don't make us more secure. And so it is argued that having nuclear weapons keeps other countries from attacking us, that having nuclear weapons preserves a balance of terror, that since so many countries have nuclear weapons, no one will ever use them. That's a terribly dangerous myth, which we know to be false. Both the United States and Russia have on multiple occasions prepared to use nuclear weapons. And at the last minute, they have stepped back from the brink, not because we had wise doctrine or sound leadership or infallible technology, but according to Robert McNamara, the former Secretary of Defense, we stepped back from the brink on these occasions because we lucked out. It was luck that prevented nuclear war.
There's a very powerful movie called The Man Who Saved the World about the Soviet military officer who refused to follow his orders when all the Soviet radar all said that there was a massive incoming US strike. And they said there's confirmation from all the other radar sites and all the other things. And he violated his orders by not doing the retaliation. He was later punished for that, but if he had, it would have been the end of the world, basically. He should have gotten the medal. Well, there are a few other cases like that. There was a case where one of our missiles actually got accidentally launched, was ready to go, and they drove a truck onto the top of the silo to try to make it explode before it could actually get launched and fall back into the silo. But there have been crucial cases where there could both be accidental launches and we're just sheer luck we escaped from them. So how do we step back from that?
Well, exactly. The idea that nuclear weapons make us safe is predicated on two assumptions. One, that we'll always have sound leaders who would never make a mistake. And secondly, our technology will never fail. And we know both of those are completely unfounded assumptions. Everything that we know indicates that human beings, including our leaders, make mistakes all the time, and so does our technology. And I think we have to understand that we are essentially living on borrowed time. We have been unbelievably lucky, probably far luckier than we had any reason to hope. And it is totally unreasonable to assume that our luck will last forever. We get accused by the realists in the Pentagon of living in a fantasy world, that we can get rid of nuclear weapons. They're the ones living in a fantasy world if they think that we can continue to maintain these arsenals forever and never have anything go wrong. It is only a matter of time unless we get rid of the weapons. So how do we do this? We have this program, Back from the Brink, and we want people to join a campaign to make this US nuclear policy. We've taken this platform to cities, to states, to faith groups, to civic organizations, to professional societies all across the country, and asked them to endorse this platform. And so far, we've got about 300 civil society organizations, about 50 municipalities, cities and towns, and 6 state legislative bodies, as well as a list of very prominent individuals who have endorsed this platform. And we want to expand this campaign. We want to get more people to endorse this platform. And when enough people say this is what US nuclear policy should be, we effectively will have created a national consensus, and hopefully we'll be able to translate that into national policy. The campaign has a website, www.preventnuclearwar.org, which I would encourage people to visit. And you can see there easily how you can join as an individual, and more importantly, how you can reach out to the communities that you belong to, your church group or your civic organization or your city council, and get them to take a public stand. That's the way democracy works.
That is so crucial, and I do think that's great to encourage everyone here to go to that site because this is absolutely essential for our very survival. And you know, we have the twin dangers we face now that the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists talk about, both of catastrophic climate change and nuclear war. And we see from your little scenario that the two are intricately connected. That if you had even just a very tiny percent of the nuclear weapons in the world used, it would cause catastrophic climate change beyond anything we could imagine. That would have untold consequences, even beyond the mass starvation in terms of, you know, shifting atmosphere of climate. You know, it could well be the termination either way. We've just lucked out to make it this far, folks. Now we've really got to mobilize to be able to make it on into the future, to the 100th anniversary of the UN and into the future.
What we need to do, for example, here in the United States, is to bring about the fundamental change in US nuclear policy that I was just talking about, that will let the United States lead the effort to bring this treaty into force for all countries, to universalize the treaty. When 50 countries ratify the treaty, it becomes law for them. We need to get all of the countries of the world to sign on to this treaty and to adhere to it. And that's going to require some further negotiation amongst the countries that still have nuclear weapons to satisfy their requirements that the treaty be properly verified and that it be properly enforced. And that needs to be it needs to be the highest priority of the incoming administration. And it clearly is not at the moment the highest priority of either party, but it needs to become that. You mentioned the connection with climate change, and I think this is really important. There's clearly nuclear war itself would produce terrible climate effects, but there's another connection as well. And that is the climate change which we are currently experiencing, global warming from carbon emissions, is driving us towards nuclear war. We're told all the time by the nuclear weapon states that, well, we got the weapons now, but we are planning to get rid of them sometime in the future. The date is never specified. The condition is the world needs to be safer than it is right now. The problem is climate change is making the world more dangerous than it is right now. And as the climate crisis that we are currently in proceeds, and it will, even if we do everything that we're supposed to, it will proceed for the next several decades. Many parts of the planet are increasingly stressed in their ability to support their current and projected human populations. And as climate change progresses, this is going to cause conflict. It's going to cause migration on a scale we have never seen in human history. And if nuclear weapons are on the table as this process unfolds, there's an increasing chance that they're going to be used. And so there's an enormous importance to dealing with both of these twin existential threats. We've got to stop the climate crisis, and we've got to get nuclear weapons out of the picture as soon as we possibly can. Climate change will cause inevitable damage to our civilization if we do not stop it. Nuclear war can cause immediate destruction of our civilization if we don't get rid of the weapons. They can be used at any time. And so there's an enormous urgency about dealing with both of these problems.
Films, obviously, from Ronald Reagan's memoirs, played a key role in getting him to step back. The Day After was seen by, it was an ABC TV special that showed what a nuclear war would look like, with Jason Robards, with the missiles taking off over Kansas, and 100 million Americans tuned in, the largest audience of any audience for a made-for-television movie before or since, and 200 million in the Soviet Union. I think that helped contribute to Glasnost and to their waking up. You mentioned you're working on another film. I made a film also with Paul Newman called War Without Winners. One thing I'd like to do is to bring back that film, up to date it, maybe you have it work with your campaign, and maybe use the beautiful introduction that Paul Newman does, and some of these people in the past, who like Kennedy and Newman and Eisenhower, who given us beautiful warnings and messages that can help us move forward. What do you think about the role of movies in helping to trigger the shift we need to make in our public?
It is my fondest dream that someone will make a movie that plays the role today that The Day After played in 1983. There's no question that movies have an enormous amount of power and potential for educating people. The key problem we face today is that the vast majority of people in the world and in the United States do not understand how likely it is that we're going to have a nuclear war or how horrible it's going to be if we have one. The knowledge, which was widespread in the 1980s, has really dissipated over time. The generations of people have grown up since the end of the Cold War who never learned about nuclear weapons. And people of our age, Arthur, for the most part, have forgotten about it, and put it out of mind. And that is really, in many ways, the heart of the problem. I believe that if people understood, again, how dangerous these weapons are, there'd be no question. They would be in the streets, as they were in the 80s, demanding that they be eliminated. So the main challenge before us is an education challenge. And we can do things by having people like me appear on podcasts like this and try to explain what's going to happen if there's a nuclear war. And that reaches a certain audience, and it's valuable activity. But a made-for-television movie or a made-for-the-theater movie that had an audience like The Day After would reach an incredibly much larger audience. And we have spoken repeatedly with contacts in the film world, encouraging them to understand this is their responsibility. They can teach people in ways that nobody else can. And I hope that some of them will listen. There are a couple of great screenplays out there that I have seen that would be terrific if made into movies. All that's missing at the moment is a studio willing to do it.
Well, let's talk more offline later about that, because that's certainly a passion of mine as well. And now I also want to turn to the solutionary movie that we've just made, and I hope many of you have seen. If not, you can go to theworldismycountry.com and see it, or a shortened version at just onefilms.com, ONEFILMS.com, an hour version and our little short films. But one of the things that Gary talked about is the need for we the people to take our responsibility to enforce world law. That is not something that we just have to wait for government leaders to do. I mean, this treaty is passed and it's official law. Then you mentioned that there are many corporations involved in it. There's many countries involved in it. I think that one of the things that we could work on, I'd love to work on with you, is how we evolve the internet tools, an app or other things where we could create what Gary called the people-powered planet. And what he essentially was saying is that the Declaration of Independence says it is the right of the people to create government. So does it's the right of people to institute new government. And the Declaration of Human Rights says the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government. Almost every constitution mirrors that. So what he was saying is, and hopefully you all see that film, he says basically that we need to plant the seeds of creating like an app, a program or something that brings together and amalgamates the highest and best wisdom of humanity, that really takes that will of the people and makes it very visible at the global level, and then also gives people action tools. For example, if we say that the sole purpose is to enforce already adopted world law, like once this international law is passed and it's law, countries are in violation. So what if people say that, okay, we go to the supermarket, we scan products, oh, this is a company that's either violating their part, one of their divisions is actually making parts for these nuclear weapons, and those are illegal weapons. We won't buy that product, or this one is supplying that company, or we go to a job site and beep, 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 here's the companies that are not international law violators, and we get a warning when they are world law violators. If we get unions, refusing to unload ships for companies that are violators and so on, is there some way that we can begin to develop where we the people can work in concert? The UN is asking, what kind of UN do you want? What's the future you want and the kind of UN you need? Don't we need one where people are more interactively involved with all these wonderful new tools we have with the internet? how can we actually begin to be part of enforcing this international law?
Well, I think there are many different kinds of activities that people can engage in. If you look at the climate model, people can try to change government policy. They can also change the way their own personal behavior to limit their carbon footprint and work at a local level. If their national government pulls out of the Paris Accords, as the US did, many people have appropriately, for the time being, focused on getting all the cities and towns in the country to adhere to what they would do under the Paris Agreement. And it doesn't matter what the man in the White House says if we're cutting our carbon footprint. When it comes to nuclear weapons, it's a little bit different. This is a decision that gets made basically as by national governments. And so the activity that we come up with has to take that into account. We need to figure out how we change the behavior of our national governments. You and I don't have nuclear weapons. So we can't get rid of our own nuclear weapons. We have to get rid of the nuclear weapons that are held by the country as a whole. It necessarily involves change in policy at the national level of the 9 countries that have these weapons. How we bring about that pressure, though, there are lots of different things people can do. So, for example, ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, has a program called Don't Bank on the Bomb, which speaks to the idea that you were just talking about. It identifies the companies that make these weapons and the missile systems that deliver the weapons. It identifies the banks that finance these companies. And it encourages people to engage in political activity to put pressure on these corporations and financial institutions to get them out of the nuclear business. And so that's one thing that people can do. People can try to get pension funds that they may be involved with to divest from these companies. Students can get universities and other educational institutions that invest their endowment with these companies to divest from these companies. So that's one kind of activity that people can engage in.
That sounds very key, that divestment. I mean, you were saying, how do we, we don't own nuclear weapons, but yet if we own stock in a company that's making money from nuclear weapons, we do own nuclear weapons, and there's the divestment. If our pension fund is going into those funds, that's a very key handle that each of us has a responsibility for.
It is, but I think we also have to understand that divesting alone isn't going to get rid of the nuclear weapons. It's still going to take a government decision. And so divestment is a way of putting pressure on companies to put pressure on the government. All of this, the end point of all of our activity has got to be changing government policy. And so I think in many ways, the most useful thing that people can do is to be engaged in this Back from the Brink campaign, which has that as its explicit focus, bringing about a change in US government policy, abandoning a reliance on nuclear weapons, adopting instead a policy which says that eliminating these weapons should be the highest national security priority of the United States. And there are many ways of sort of creating the national uproar about this. Going to your local community, if it has not already endorsed the campaign, is one of the most powerful. We would love to have many more cities, many more towns, many more state legislatures officially endorse this as what US nuclear policy should be. If you belong to a faith group that has not already endorsed this campaign, go to your church group. Get your local church to do it, get your local synagogue, your local mosque, and get your national religious organization to endorse the campaign. If you belong to a labor union, get your union to endorse this campaign. If you belong to a professional society, get them to endorse it. That's kind of the model that the Freeze campaign used in the 1980s. Basically got more and more communities around the country to say, we want to freeze the arms race. And that became a national consensus. And that is what created the climate in which the day after could resonate with large numbers of people. And Ronald Reagan could decide that he had been wrong, and that we needed to change nuclear policy fundamentally. That's the same kind of process that Back from the Brink is trying to bring about today. And again, the website, preventnuclearwar.org, makes it very clear to people, very simple, how you participate, how you join up with this campaign. And I believe that in a fairly short period of time, we can bring about change of government at the government policy level. We saw that happen in the 1980s.
Right.
Reagan became president in 1981, saying that we would fight and win a war, a nuclear war in Europe. It was only 4 years later that he and Gorbachev said, nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought.
Yeah.
And the rapidity of that reversal really was stunning. Most of us didn't believe it when they first said that. We thought this was just, words out of their mouths, not their new policy. So we can and should take great hope from that success, that it is possible to bring about huge changes in nuclear policy in a relatively short period of time if we mobilize ourselves, are clear in what we're asking for, and to go about the work of talking to people about it.
But what you said about people power is so crucial. I mean, Eisenhower says at the end of my movie, the world is a war without winners. That played a big role in that nuclear freeze movement. We had both the first version in the 70s and then a revised version with Paul Newman in the 80s. And Kennedy, during the test ban treaty, a group of people trying to push for the test ban met with him, and he said, look, I would like to help you with this, but I can't do it until you build a mass movement to make me do it. You have to make me do this. I can't do it. So people don't realize that, but we actually are the ones with the power. President Kennedy told them that. He didn't have the power to do it until they made him do it. And then people did. The Women's Strike for Peace mobilized, Women's National League for Peace and Freedom, people all over mobilized and got the president to do that nuclear test ban treaty, which was so crucial. So even though he wanted to, he couldn't. So whether the president wants to or not, you gave the example of Reagan, who didn't want to, and he got moved to do it. So people power really is the key, and that's where you come in, and that's what our People Powered Planet podcasts are about, and that's where we want to have everybody involved. So for all of you people who have joined us, we're pretty soon going to open this up to questions and comments. You are the people. How do you think you can help to actually prevent nuclear war, and how crucial is it to you to begin to move this up in your priorities to step back from the brink? Let me turn it over for a moment now to Melanie Bennett, who is she was the producer on the film that I directed, The World Is My Country, and she's a co-host of this special podcast. And she and our volunteer Tom, who's been helping out as well, are also part of this. So now, take it away, Melanie.
Hello, everyone. Wow, thank you, Ira. Oh my goodness. Yes, we do have some questions. The first question is from a person that Ira and Arthur already know because they have been on her talk show, which is at tosavetheworld.ca. Meta Spencer. Meta Spencer, I'm going to ask you to unmute, and I'm going to ask you to start your video, and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, hi, it's wonderful to see all of you. And Melanie, you too were on my show a little bit. So it's great to see all three of you again. Indeed, every week I have a talk show and we have good conversations, exactly like this one. So blessings. I have a lot of things I could ask, but I think I want to get down to brass tacks and ask Ira something. The real issue, the immediate issue, making things more ominous nowadays, is the threat that the START treaty will not be renewed. And, we don't have very many safety guardrails against nuclear war now, but that's one of the few remaining things that are helpful. And to lose it would be a catastrophe. And so Russia has said they would be happy to continue the START treaty, which was negotiated by Obama and Medvedev. But the US is saying, no, we don't want to do it as a bilateral treaty anymore. We want to have negotiations that would also involve China. And I think you're very right in pointing out that we really do need to bring China into the whole conversation. China's role in the world is not exactly benign lately. But China is saying, yeah, we might participate if, in fact, all 5 of the P5 countries, the countries with nuclear weapons, that is not only China, the US and Russia, but also France and the UK, should be all treated as having a given parity, that we should all be discussants in trying to form a new treaty or new disarmament negotiations. And I think, of course, people brush that off as unrealistic and kind of silly, and that really the only hope is to go for the full shot, that is total disarmament along the lines prescribed by the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. But I think actually it might be nice for somebody to pick up that idea of saying, okay, you want to have all 5 countries negotiate on nuclear weapons? That's a good idea. All of those countries have nuclear weapons. So why don't we start pressing for people to take that idea seriously, that is a proposal. It certainly is not the end of the matter, because once they negotiate, that's far from reaching any kind of disarmament agreement. And I'm sure that it's all of those countries are really just putting up, fake arguments to avoid coming to terms with real disarmament. I'm not taking it as a really serious thing, but I would wonder if you might not think there'd be some value in taking that up as an arguing point, Ira.
Thank you, Meta. Go ahead, Ira.
Well, I think with regards to New START, the China thing is a complete, diversion. This is a treaty between the United States and Russia. The United States and Russia need to sit down and extend this treaty, period, and then move on from there. And the extension of New START should not be held hostage to Chinese participation. The Chinese nuclear arsenal is much smaller than the US and Russian thresholds that are established by New START, and New START really doesn't concern China. Beyond getting New START, though, which should be a no-brainer, that should, it should have happened already, they should just do it. And presumably, if Trump doesn't get around to doing it, the new administration will do that as one of the first things they do in January. But I do think that the idea of negotiations among the nuclear weapon states, all of them, is very important. It isn't just a US-Russian problem, but I don't think it should be just the P5. I think the negotiations need to involve India and Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel as well. And that's what we call for in Back from the Brink, that the United States, this being a US initiative, that the United States should convene negotiations involving all 9 nuclear weapon states with a goal of achieving the complete elimination of their arsenals. These are complicated negotiations, but there's no reason that they can't be conducted quickly and lead to a fairly early decision to get rid of the weapons if there is the political will to do that. Yeah. And there are some obvious obstacles that you can identify. We don't need to get into this now. Different countries are going to be looking for different things. But those considerations all need to be seen in the context of the imminent threat to human survival that these weapons pose. And if you view it from that context, if you look at it this as a humanitarian crisis that needs to be solved, then I think that is the perspective from which we can move forward to a rapid resolution of this problem.
Thank you.
Right.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And then we have Jerry Tettleman. He's next. He'd like to ask a question. Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, hi. Dr. Helfand. I'm Jerry Tettleman, and I've been a long time World Federalist and a member of Citizens for Global Solutions, and working to create reform at the UN, to transform the UN into a more effective organization, or to build a limited world government, a democracy. And I really am refreshed to listen to your talk. I listened to your one at the Rotary Club, that you're bringing something to the consciousness, which is the real problem. But the real solution, at least from my perspective, is that we need to create a system of international enforceable democratic law. And this could be from the democracies banding together as a beginning of a global union like the European Union, or it could be from UN reform or transformation. And I want to get your take on that, to see, what do you think about world federalism or transforming the UN into something more democratic and more enforceable, or maybe a federation of democratic countries? What is your take on those subjects?
That's an excellent question from Jerry for Ira, because, you know, under law in the city, you wouldn't say, well, you know, 80% of the people voted for this law, but the criminals haven't agreed to it yet, so we can't do it. That doesn't work that way under law. The people who are the violators don't get to torpedo the law. But so that's why we do really need to move toward actual law. What do you think, Ira, about that question?
Well, I think that moving in the direction of some kind of world government is incredibly important and ultimately something that we're going to need. And I think that we need to understand a couple of things about the nuclear problem in this context, though. One is the time frame. I don't know how long it's going to take to bring about a world government. I think we have an incredibly short period of time to achieve major progress in eliminating nuclear weapons. As I said earlier, we are living on borrowed time. We've been far luckier than we have any right to expect. And we need to appreciate that if we don't get rid of these weapons, I can't tell you exactly the time frame, 5 years, 10 years, they're going to end human civilization.
Yeah, I think that is so crucial. And I think we need to be going on several of these fronts at once. And I think there is big movement forward with the UN calling for a worldwide conversation. So there is a movement in that direction, and your treaty becoming international law is a key part of that.
I think the process of negotiating the agreement to eliminate all nuclear weapons can be a huge step towards building the kind of international community that you're talking about, Jerry. The experience that we have negotiating this treaty is going to build a kind of dialogue between nations. It's going to create the kind of trust between nations that are absolutely essential to have a real world, effective world government. So I think that the process of negotiating the elimination of nuclear weapons should be seen as something which needs to take place immediately and which can be an important building block in the process that you're talking about.
Great.
I agree with you. I think we have to do all these things at once, and we have to do as many things as we can, and we will get there. But there is an urgency, and I appreciate you bringing the urgency out, because the general public right now, you're right, it's not on the radar as number one, and it really still should be number one issue in the world.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you, Jerry. And it looks like we're just 6 minutes before the top of the hour. We do have another question we can fit in. Jean Stevens, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. I recently got in contact with Arthur and Melanie, and Ira, I saw you at the Pace and Bene for the 75th. It was wonderful what you said. I am the director of the Taos Environmental Film Festival, and I was going to screen The Man Who Saved the World and also the film by ICAN, The Beginning of the End of Nuclear Weapons this year, but the film festival was canceled, and I don't know the future. But I was born in 1949 and grew up in Los Angeles with the threat, maybe the #1 city with the threat of nuclear weapons. And anyone born after 1988, like you said, Ira, totally have not been infused with the media. Last year, I was at the Taormina Film Festival. Oliver Stone was there. I had a press pass, and I raised my hand, and I said, why aren't there filmmakers making films? And it turned out that they had a film, and they didn't really want to address my question because he produced a film on the Ukraine. At the end of the film, an atom bomb went off. So my latest passion, and I just sent Arthur and Melanie my little script, which included his film of the United Nations on the 21st and for sure on the 26th. If they were able to put on a multimedia event that went globally, because we need the mainstream to get involved and to be educated. And growing up with Woodstock and then the Central Park 1982 with all the musicians, and the little movie that was made in 1983 with the children working for the abolition of nuclear weapons. And it really did make an impact on Reagan, and apparently the same thing in Russia. And the Beatles made such an impact on Russia too, to have the wall come down. So I really appreciate everything you're doing. And if you have any connection with United Nations, I think that's the platform. And music, people need to have joy in their life, and we need to be, have your short film, Arthur, and the things that were done with the Physicians for Social Responsibility, the Peace Plus Art Music, and the other one, Something Heaven out of New York during the 75th. So I just wanted to put that out. I'm passionate. I feel like every day is a gift and we could all die tomorrow. Thank you.
It is a gift. That's beautiful. And we definitely need the cultural shifts. Last word on that, Ira, before I move toward our close.
Arthur, I totally agree with those comments. And I must apologize. There is an emergency in my office. I'm going to have to get off of this right now. Forgive me.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful. We so appreciate that you were able to be with us. Dr. Helfand is, active doctor and has been moving from helping to save individual patients to saving all of us, because of course in a nuclear war there wouldn't be any doctors to take care of us. So now we're moving toward the positive, and Jean had a beautiful way to close this. We've got to do the music, the culture, the shifts, and incredible things can come out of that. No one thought the Soviet Union could fall and the Berlin Wall could fall. But then out of the ashes of it, we've now got new problems because we haven't yet learned how to create a people-powered planet. We've learned how to use nonviolence to help bring down governments. Now we got to learn nonviolent ways of joining with governing our world. So come back next week when we're continuing our discussion. We're going to have a wonderful discussion with a key proponent of nonviolence, working to create a major shift. And as we move toward dangerous situations, it's so important that people stick to the nonviolent path. That's the real power. That's what brought down the Soviet Union, not somebody, I personally met with Landsbergis, the first president, the first head of state of Lithuania, who started the singing revolution. You talked about song that helped bring down the mighty Soviet Union and lead to one after another the countries withdrawing. And many, many people had tried to violently fight the Soviets before that and completely failed. They did this nonviolent singing revolution. Anyway, they brought down the Soviet Union, and 2 weeks later, Gary gave Landsbergis a world passport that you'll see more about in our movie, The World Is My Country. And when I met with him recently in Lithuania, he said he loved that so much because he didn't want to now travel. He had an old Soviet diplomatic passport, but he didn't want to travel with that, with the country he was just, bringing down, withdrawing from. So he was so thrilled to actually travel with a world passport back in those days. So we'll be talking more about that and more about how we make shifts in the world. As scary as the situation is, I've always said there's, and I'll tell you this more, there's sort of literally an ocean of darkness you can drown in, but there's simultaneously an ocean of light, of people coming together, connecting, overcoming things. And that is part of the luck that made us live for 75 years since the bomb and since that nuclear clock was ticking. And so now it's time, folks, for us to move forward with a people-powered planet. So come back next week to the People-Powered Planet podcast, when we'll continue to have exciting guests and continue to talk about how we indeed can change our world and how we actually do have the power.
World citizen, lift up your voices. We got something to say. All we need is the same directions, heading in one way.